We use 5 values, which are solidarity, participatory democracy, equity in all dimensions, so race, class, gender, etc., sustainability, and then the 5th one is pluralism. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model. So we start with values. We look for practices, real-world practices that align with these values, not just one, but all of these values, and then try to connect them up both theoretically, conceptually, as well as in the real world, connect them up so that we can start to see, say, a worker co-op and a credit union and a community land trust as all being part of system change instead of isolated, atomized, laudable projects. So that's what the solidarity is trying to do, economy is trying to do, is connect up a lot of things that are already in existence that are prefiguring another world.
So it's something to do with inclusion then in an economy that's for all of the people. Is that
absolutely?
Is that kind of
right? So an economy that really centers people and planet. I would have to say that solidarity economy is also very clear, like has gone through a process where it's very clear about having a post-capitalist vision. So not to throw stones at people that believe that we can build a more just and sustainable system by reforming capitalism, but that's not a solidarity economy framework. So solidarity economy is definitely saying that we believe, right, that we're not going to get to that more just and sustainable world by reforming capitalism. We have to move beyond, we have to build on capitalism, transform it entirely so that it's really a systemic change.
So what would capitalism look like, or what would things look like when it's not capitalism and when it's something else?
Right. Yeah, so, a lot of people would say, so as an economist, I've spent most of my life as an...
Hang on.
Sure.
As the Systems Change Alliance, there's a question we've been wanting to ask, which is, it fits in kind of here. What are the 3 main systemic changes that you think the world needs at this point?
Yeah, well, to me, right, system change is one thing, right? And then system change is comprised of many, many, many elements, right? So to me, in the framework that I work in, which is solidarity economy, I am working to bring into being the solidarity economy. Now, what that looks like in different cultures and different political realities and different points of history will vary a lot. So it's not a blueprint. Different things are going to work at different times, but it is fundamentally different than capitalism. If you take those values and you start taking those apart and looking at the implications of those values, there are dimensions that just clash with a capitalist system. So I've spent many years working as in popular economics, so helping people understand how the economy works or doesn't work. So regular folks without any background in economics, helping people grapple with what is very deliberately mystified, right? And by mystifying the economy, it means that people feel like, oh, it's too complicated, I can't understand it, therefore I'll let the so-called experts manage the economy, which is a really dangerous idea. The economy is comprised of all of us. It should serve our welfare and well-being, and it's a terrible thing just to say, oh, let the experts take care of it.
So having the ordinary people understand and be able to participate in some way in the, I guess you say economic democracy, would you?
Economic democracy absolutely is part of it, but just understanding the economy as, it's what we all live, right? We all live, we all we comprise the economy. The economy is a social system, right? It's constructed by human beings. And if we don't feel like it is serving the welfare of people and planet, and if that's our goal, then we need to change it. So that when we're talking about system change from a solidarity economy perspective, we're really saying capitalism will never get us where we want to get to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what would look different? For one thing, a big divide is ownership and control, right? So that economic democracy is really important, right? So in the United States, we have supposedly, although it would be recent events might lead you to believe that we don't even have real political democracy, but leaving that aside, we certainly don't have democracy in all areas of our lives, right? We certainly don't have democracy in most workplaces, right? The business is owned by the capitalists, the owners, and the workers are hired on, and they can fight for a greater share, they can fight for some voice, but ultimately it's the owners that own and control that business. And so a solidarity economy business would look like, say, a worker cooperative, which is owned by the workers. So the people that are doing the work, that really have a day-to-day stake in that business staying rooted in that community and not getting transplanted to another country, or they're the ones that really care about what the working conditions are. They would have control. They would have a voice and a control over that business, for example. But it's way beyond. Solidarity economy would be way beyond just what kind of businesses we have, right?
Okay, so it would start with like the ownership of the businesses would be one point, but there would be other things as well, yeah? Okay.
Lots. So yeah.
What else would there be?
Well, if you were to look at from an economics perspective, we can talk about different economic sectors. Solidarity economy, or practices that align with the values that I mentioned, that are democratic and sustainable and equitable and cooperative, exist in all of these sectors. The sectors that we talk about are production, distribution and exchange, consumption, finance, and governance, right? So you can look at, I will share a Prezi if you share out links afterwards, where you can, it's kind of like an interactive PowerPoint where you can look at each sector and see examples. So in production, you have things like worker cooperatives, you have collectives, you also have things that are unwaged or non-monetized. So for example, solidarity economy would embrace as a very important and valuable form of economic activity, care work, right? So we all do that, right? We all take care of our kids or our parents or our neighbors, or right? We're all engaged in that. If you pay somebody to do that, right, it has a real economic value in mainstream economics. But solidarity economy would say this is really work to be valued as part of the economy, whether you're paid for it or not. So that's production, right? So things like DIY, community gardens, that's all part of production. Distribution exchange, we would embrace things like local currencies, social currencies, time banks, fair trade, some elements of fair trade, although it starts getting fuzzy when you have like big corporations like Walmart that has its own brand of fair trade. So that's distribution and exchange. Consumption, we're looking at democratically owned and managed forms of consumption. So for example, a community land trust or a cooperative housing or a food co-op, right? Those are all collective democratic forms of consuming. And finance, credit unions by definition, for example, are a form of cooperative. Community loan funds, peer-to-peer lending. So there are examples in all of those spheres. And in terms of governance, we often look at processes that are really more participatory and democratic. A good example is participatory budgeting, where people in that community have control over a certain amount of the public budget, and they get to decide where it's allocated. So those are just some examples of solidarity economy.
So you're talking about a lot of democratic approaches.
Democratic, but democratic alone is not enough, right? Because you could have democratic that is very, maybe it's so say you have a democratic cooperative that is internally democratic, but it's really environmentally damaging, right? So that's why we say the intersection between all of these values are very important, right? All those 5 values are important. We're not expecting practitioners or these practices to be perfect, but to at least be trying to address alignment in all of these areas.
Okay. So what kind of challenges do you find there are in making these things happen?
Well, right now is a really good time for the solidarity economy, right? Because there are these multiple crises. I don't know how it gets defined where you are in the United States, right? There's obviously COVID, the pandemic, and then all the fallout from that, right? All these businesses shut down, people getting evicted. We can anticipate there's all the economic fallout, right? And then we have been dealing with terrible, wildfires and intensified hurricanes and these natural weather disasters because of climate change. So that's another area of crisis. We've been dealing a lot with these racial justice uprisings throughout our country in response to racial violence and police brutality. And then lay over all of that this slide towards fascism, really, let's just call it, right? That's actually what we're facing and really a challenge to our entire democratic system. There's been just such an active attack on it, trying to undermine the elections and the election results. So like all these crises, and so these crises that are converging and are also interrelated, have a silver lining in that this rupture, right? This rupture of all these crises are also creating an opening towards a different way of doing things, right? So with COVID, all of a sudden, you saw people turning towards mutual aid, right? That just blossomed almost.
What do you mean by mutual aid?
Oh, you don't use that term. So in my neck of the woods, I live in Western Massachusetts. There was a kind of a spontaneous explosion of a mutual aid network where sorry, that was my sound going out.
Your sound going out.
People could put their needs and their offers. So maybe somebody needed help with shopping. Somebody could say, I will do that. It ranged from those kind of tasks to some people just needed money paying for food or paying for rent, and other people were saying, okay, I can handle that, or I can help you with meals, I can bring over some meals, or you need help moving this or that. So that throughout the country has just there's been a huge upsurge in mutual aid. So, I mean, historically, that's a lot how human beings survive, is really through helping each other out. So solidarity economy is building on a history that is as old as human beings have existed, right? We exist through cooperation and caring for each other. Right? And capitalism doesn't lift that up, right? It lifts up competition. And through competition, and coordination through the market prices. That's in capitalism, the analysis is that's how we're going to get the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But it's the problem with that assumption is it encourages that self-interest, and it encourages that competitiveness, and it encourages that just that kind of worldview of if I just take care of myself, that's the best for everybody, right? That this is really the capitalist Adam Smith philosophy. And wouldn't it be better to build a world where, there's some of that happening. Let's be realistic. There's always some self-interest, but also there's love, there's reciprocity, there's solidarity, there's cooperation, there's mutualism. And that's despite capitalism. That's all strong, right? That survives.
There's a concept popular concept I've heard that humans in the ancient times used to barter, used to exchange things through barter, and this is the very old form of the economy. But my understanding is that this is not accurate, and that actually humans in ancient times were, within their tribe, they were about sharing. And the barter system only existed between tribes. And so if we have a small group that works together and shares, this is actually the natural way that humans have been doing things for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not always like a tit for a tat, right?
Yeah. But there is elements of this bartering that happens sometimes. And so we do still believe in some kind of financial exchange, yes?
Absolutely. And look, one thing that's so liberating to me about the solidarity economy is there's this principle, this value of pluralism. So it is not a one-size-fits-all model. And if some societies or some local societies want to eliminate currency, fine. Play around with that. If it works and it spreads, let's do it. But let's not get bogged down in it's either this or it's that, right? I mean, it is the values that are important to not be violating those values. But exactly how you get there are many, many paths. And I think it's just destructive to say, oh, it's only this, it's only that, right? Like there are some people who say, oh, no, solidarity economy has to be opposed completely to markets. Here's why. Solidarity economy is not in a position where it's choosing. It's saying, let's have that debate. Let's have that debate. Let's have the experiments. Let's see what works, right? And let's be a bit more organic. Yeah.
So this solidarity economy network, what do you actually do in this organization?
Well, so we really exist as a network to connect proponents, advocates, academics, and particularly practitioners. So people who are actually working to build the solidarity economy or solidarity economy practices. So when we started in 2007.
So who would that be? Who would that be? Someone who's doing community development?
Not maybe, but particular kinds of community development. So practitioners might be somebody who's building worker co-ops or food co-ops or developing community land trusts. You know that term, yeah? Community land trusts?
I have a vague understanding of it. Maybe it's worth defining it exactly.
So a community land trust is where the land, there are different models, but I'll just describe a common one, where the land is held by a trust, right? It's held in perpetuity for some purpose. Say it's held in perpetuity to provide affordable housing. Right. So they get grant money, they leverage various kinds of financing options to build housing which they are able to sell at under market rates, right, making it affordable because they've been able to leverage this this funding.
But the land
and
is always owned by the community rather
exactly,
than by individuals.
it's owned by the trust or the community, exactly. So when you buy the house, you don't pay for the land, right? So that's a savings, and then you get it for a great price. So it means somebody who might be shut out of the housing market is able to purchase a home, but in exchange, when it comes time, say they want to sell the house, and housing prices have tripled, right? They cannot sell it for triple, right? There's some formula where they can recoup their investments and then some appreciation. But it keeps that housing permanently affordable. So that's a community land trust, and they can be used for farming, it can be used for business development, but it's that same idea.
So fair enough. So we're talking about people who are starting and developing projects like community land trusts and co-ops and such things that are based on our economy now.
Not necessarily starting though, right? So way back in the beginning when I said some of these are old and some are new and some are mainstream and some are alternative, they're not all new things that people are starting up. So, I mean, for example, cooperatives are hundreds of years old. Credit unions, by definition, are a form of cooperative. They are owned by their members, by the depositors. So those go way back. Those go way back, and they're very common. And a lot of them are quite mainstream. In fact, many of them are mainstream to the point where they've kind of lost touch with their original
values. So you create a network that's connecting these people up. How do you support them?
We don't really support them in terms of concrete services. So the Solidarity Economy Network is unfunded for the most part. We're a network. We're run by volunteers. We don't have staff. People send us money sometimes, but we don't really have a budget.
Okay, fair enough. But what I'm trying to get at is
what do we do?
What do they get out of it? Why do people join this network?
Yeah, so we do different things throughout time. We have had a number of national gatherings. We have been a placeholder for Solidarity Economy. So when we started in 2007 in the United States, it was pretty much completely unheard of. Now, in the left progressive movements, activist movements, as well as to a growing extent in the foundation world and community organizations, people have heard of Solidarity Economy, even if they're not sure what it is, right? So it's gone from being unheard of to being something that in some places it's being funded, organizations are saying, we're building the Solidarity Economy.
Right. So you've created a voice for this.
Absolutely. People come all the time and get in touch with us saying, I'm interested in local currencies. Can you help me figure out how to do this? And we'll at least connect them, right? And it's also a way within our network of connecting up these sectors. So on our board, for just example, we would be including national federations or associations of different sectors like worker co-ops, like community development credit unions, which work in low-income communities, like the Rural Coalition, which works with small farms and farm workers, etc. Right. So we definitely reached out to organizations that represent these different practices that align with Solidarity Economy, and so just providing a space and opportunities for there to be that connection and cross-pollination and discussions about how can we work together. Well, we've published a couple books. We've been having convenings this year around strategy. So solidarity economy is very grounded in the build, right? Creating these different kinds of economic practices.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also an important connection and integration to be made with the resist end, right? So those are social movements that are fighting against racism, they're fighting against poverty, they're fighting against oppression, et cetera, or they're fighting for sustainability, right? So that's the social movements part of resist. But the other part of resist is a political and electoral strategy. So it's fighting to get in representatives in the political system that will also push policies that will on the one hand fight against injustice, but also favor solidarity economy. So those are the kind of things that we do.
So you're also involved in what's this Wellspring Cooperative Corporation. Can you tell me what that is?
That's my day job. So we are located in the third largest city in Massachusetts. And it's your typical, in the US, it's your typical deindustrialized city. Springfield, Massachusetts has a very powerful history as an industrial innovator once upon a time. But it's lost that industrial manufacturing base entirely, almost entirely. And so now it's quite poor, high unemployment, high crime, terrible education system, et cetera, like all that typical stuff of our Rust Belt cities. So Wellspring Cooperative is working on building a network of worker-owned cooperatives in Springfield's underserved communities. So Springfield is part of what we call the Pioneer Valley, through which the Connecticut River runs. And we often talk about the Upper Valley and the Lower Valley. The Upper Valley is full of co-ops, full of worker co-ops and consumer co-ops and all kinds of solidarity economy stuff. The Upper Valley is where these 5 colleges are. So, there's all these prestigious colleges and universities, and it's quite different. In the Lower Valley is where in Western Mass is where our urban centers are, with these concentrations of poverty, communities of color, immigrant communities, and there's almost no cooperatives or any other kind of solidarity economy other than the informal kind of stuff. So part of the reason that Wellspring Cooperative exists is to say, look, if cooperatives are all that great, all about economic democracy and wealth building for the worker owners, if it's not relevant, if it doesn't exist in all communities and only in the relatively well-educated and affluent and white communities like in the Upper Valley, then we're not building the world that we want to. So very deliberately located in Springfield to build worker-owned businesses. So we have, 6 businesses in our network right now. We have an upholstery shop. They reupholster furniture, mostly for hospitals and colleges. We have a window restoration co-op, which is just women. So they take old wooden windows and restore them and then reinstall them. We have a 1/4-acre hydroponic greenhouse that sells to both the institutional market as well as stores. We have a cleaning cooperative and then a little hula hoop cooperative. And then we have 2 that are startups that have joined our network. One is a cafe and one is a cannabis growing cooperative. So someday, our vision is we'll have 100 cooperatives in our network, providing, thousands of jobs, and it will become the norm, right?
Okay, and you help to, what do? You incubate, or you help them to
Yeah,
start, or what
yeah,
is it?
yeah, yeah. So we do incubate. So the upholstery shop and the greenhouse, Wellspring Cooperative really did the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the research to the business plan to raising capital to finding the talent and the place and putting the whole business together.
Right.
Others, like the ones I was saying, the startups that have joined our network,
Mm.
those are folks that they were on that path already, right?
Right.
They were forming their businesses. They already knew they wanted to do a co-op, um, and and we connected.
Mm.
So we are supporting them in various ways, whether it's helping them develop their bylaws or helping to figure out how to raise the capital to start, whatever it might be.
Mm.
The other pathway is a conversion. So a traditional capitalist business
Mm-hmm.
where the owner is interested in selling the business to the workers. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the cleaning. The example of that is the cleaning co-op. The owner, her values just align with wanting to do right by her workers and wanting for the whole business to operate more democratically, where she doesn't have all the responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they're working on becoming a co-op right now.
Okay.
She's the owner, but so we talk about that as being a co-op conversion.
Mm-hmm.
So those are, yeah.
And you're supporting them through that process of conversion?
We are, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, yeah.
Mm. Okay, so this is like how long have you been operating?
Well, we started even just shopping around the idea in late 2010. We launched our first business in
Mm-hmm.
2014. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of like foundation to lay down, building relationships. We
Mm-hmm.
started off building on what's called an anchor institution model. I would refer people, the original anchor institution model was pioneered in Cleveland by the Evergreen Cooperatives.
Mm-hmm.
The basic idea is that we built relationships with these large anchor institutions like hospitals and colleges in our
Mm-hmm.
region that are anchored in place, right? These hospitals and colleges are not
Mm-hmm.
going to pick up and move out of the country or even out of the state. They're anchored in place. They are nonprofits, and they spend a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And can we build some businesses to meet those anchor institution needs?
Mm-hmm.
So the upholstery shop mostly does work for these anchor
Oh, okay.
institutions,
I see.
and we sell our lettuce to these anchor institutions. So we're
Mm-hmm.
we're leveraging that relationship.
Okay, that's cool. So what's the hardest thing about starting a co-op?
Oh, small businesses are hard, whether you're starting a co-op or whether you're starting a conventional, business.
Mm-hmm.
Small businesses are just tough, right? Like it's normal for that small business to lose money for the first few years. That's just
Mm-hmm.
normal, normal, normal. And owners, whoever starts it up, they're putting in, long, long hours for often, it's they're using their savings to
Mm-hmm.
survive. So that's tough for a startup co-op, right? That's really tough to ask, um, and especially in low-income communities,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's tough, right? So the up until COVID hit, the upholstery shop had just a year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, had really finally, after being founded in 2014, really had become profitable, was really in good shape, was just had work lined up, was doing great, and then COVID hit, and all the colleges and university jobs vanished, and a lot of the hospital jobs also. So now they're in trouble, right? There isn't enough work. We've lost a number of core workers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just hard for everybody, right? Like the entire economy is hurting from
Mm-hmm.
COVID and the
Mm-hmm.
shutdowns. Um, Yeah, business is tough. I mean, our greenhouse was a huge capital raise. Like we raised over $1.5 million to launch that business, and everything just dependably costs more, and there's more problems than you could ever imagine, right? On all levels, it's just endless. It's endless. So that business is in its third year, and that's still taking a huge amount of our time, keeping it afloat. Yeah, so co-ops are hard. Co-ops are hard in this community, right? In this city where a lot of people have never heard of a co-op. So trying to get support among residents, the community, as well as people who have power, so people in city government or the economic development department, etc. It's tough because we're small or operation, and they don't know what a co-op is. So we don't find any hostility, but also it's a under known. People don't know about them.
I find it's fascinating talking to people about co-ops because nobody seems to pay them much attention, but nobody says no. And so if you speak in the right way, you can get a lot of support, but you actually have to drum up that support a bit. One of the fun things I did is went to all of the different political parties and convinced them all that co-ops were their own idea. And so I had the Liberal Party, which is the right-wing capitalist party, telling me that cooperatives are a perfect way of running a capitalist economy, and it's capitalism in its ideal form. And then of course you have the socialists telling me that it's socialism, and the Christian party telling me that they're Christian ethics in practice.
I mean, it's true, right? I mean, cooperatives are not in and of themselves very threatening at all to people. In terms of like alignment with values. I mean, we definitely pitch it as, American sort of pioneer spirit is not individual. The pioneer spirit was people work together, right? And so there's definitely that to play on. But I would never let pass, like a worker cooperative is not a capitalist business. It just isn't by definition. It isn't, right? Because it is not owned by a capitalist. You don't have that class divide, right? Owner, worker. So there are.
It depends who you're talking to, how you want to spin it, but what the words mean. What do we mean by capitalism? And we do still believe in cooperatives and solidarity economy. We do still believe in the power of capital, and that we need to be able to own and start things and get projects up. We just don't believe in private ownership.
Capital is not necessarily the problem. Capital just means you're using money to do something, related, to do something useful and productive that's going to really create more capital, right? Whether it's a business or whatever, right? Capital isn't really the problem. There's just so much. Having spent so much of my life doing the popular economics, I come across this all the time, that capitalism is just too complicated. You can't define it. Therefore, it's just kind of like on the left, it becomes a catch-all for anything that we don't like. And that's really sloppy thinking. And so the Center for Popular Economics, which is, I've been a member for over 30 years. I was a director for almost 10 years. So the Center for Popular Economics is a collective of progressive to radical economists. And we've been around for over 40 years, really demystifying the economy. And we have a definition of capitalism where we talk about these 5 characteristics of capitalism, and you need them all together. And it suffices. We've been using it for 40 years. It works. It's not the be all and end all of what is capitalism, but it's actually a destructive notion, I think. Dangerous. Just to throw up your hands and say, it just depends on who wants to define it. It's dangerous. It is something you can define. And if you're going to talk about system change, so this is really relevant to y'all, right? If you're going to talk about system change, you really, really, really do need to be able to say, well, these are the characteristics of and the logic of capitalism.
So you've defined 5 characteristics of the solidarity
economy. You want me to?
What are the 5 characteristics of the
okay,
capitalist economy?
Here are the 5 for capitalism. You have private ownership of the MOPs. So the MOPs are the means of production. So it's your land and your factories and your tools and your equipment, right? So private ownership of the means of production. So that's owned by the capitalist, the owner. Yeah. You have wage labor, which are, the capitalist then hires people who don't own, they're working for a wage. Those 2 right there is your class struggle, right? Class struggle takes many forms, but in capitalism, it's a class struggle between the owners and the workers. That's why a worker cooperative, which is owned by just the workers, is not a capitalist formation. So in addition to the private ownership of the means of production and wage labor, it's market distribution, profit maximization, and damn, I am forgetting something. I am.
Tell me when you remember it.
I will. This is unbelievable. Anyway, yeah.
So you've talked about how co-ops are difficult. Why should we bother? Is it worth it?
Hold on. Did I say profit maximization?
You said profit maximization.
Okay,
yes.
Market distribution. Private ownership for means production.
We'll get there soon.
Damn, yeah. Terrible. Total blip. Sorry, your question was.
No worries. So the co-ops, they're difficult. But is it worth it? Is it worth it?
Absolutely. So
why is it worth it? What do we get out of it?
Right. Well, they are difficult, and they're not necessarily more difficult than any business, right? There is a way in which practicing democracy in the workplace can be difficult, especially because we're not used to, and we don't grow up being good at doing that, right? It's something that you can learn and you can structure into your workplace. But it's easier in other ways because you have greater buy-in, you have more consultation, so people feel like they're part of that decision-making process. If people feel like they have a voice, if you under good circumstances, it's just a more, well, if you look at the studies and you look at the data, worker co-ops outperform capitalist businesses in terms of longevity. They stay in business longer. They do better in terms of industry average wages and benefits, lower turnover, greater worker satisfaction. And if it's a successful business, then workers share in the profits. They get to decide what happens to the profits, which is really important, right? Because otherwise they don't have any, unless they're part of a union and they're fighting for a greater share, right? They don't have any voice into what happens with those profits, right? Yeah, so people that work in a cooperative really do talk about how it's so much more satisfying, and they feel like respected. They have their own dignity. They're not just being told what to do. They're not a cog in the machine. They have some control over their workplace. So that's got to be good for them.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I've seen the co-ops that I've seen have been really fun. I've really had a joy in them. What kind of challenges do you see the cooperative movement facing, the movement as a whole?
Well, co-ops are really experiencing a boom here in the United States. They're growing. They are. One thing that's really interesting and great is that they are growing in underserved populations. So they're growing in communities of color. They're growing in immigrant communities. There are many that are being developed in poor communities. And there's growing support for this, both in terms of some government funding, so city municipal funding is going into cooperative development as a strategy for inclusive economic development. So inclusive in terms of race and in terms of income. There are foundations that are putting some pretty major money into co-ops, particularly into conversions, co-op conversions, because there's probably, it's true, most places, so many of our small businesses are owned by baby boomers who are reaching a retirement age, and they don't have a succession plan. They don't know what they're going to do with their business, and so pretty often those businesses just close down, even though it's a viable, profitable business. And so one option is selling it to your workers, doing right by them. But also it's, financially, it's not a bad model for owners. They get their money upon retiring, and there are some tax breaks and stuff like that. So there's a lot of attention on conversions right now.
So do you see anything that is challenging, anything that obstacles that are coming up?
The world is about to end. I guess that's challenging, right? I mean, it's scary times too, right? I mean, climate change for one. This drift towards fascism, right? It's so in the United States, it doesn't end with Trump, right? No. It certainly doesn't, right? This growing sort of here taking the form of white nationalism in Europe. My sense is, it's more articulated around anti-immigrant, right? But that's feeding and fueling this divide and, fear and blame instead of coming together, right? And working together and supporting each other. It's like, who can we scapegoat, right? That's very dangerous, and that's a trend, right? It's a trend throughout the world. That's getting stronger. So that's,
it's kind of a trend towards fear. It's kind of a trend towards fear, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's a scary thing, and that's why, this discussion about system change is so important at this juncture, right? And to be able to say we have a choice, right? It's this one road leads to really barbarism, and the other is, something that's much more about taking care of each other, right? And working together, right? So that's the hope. And I think, in 2008, solidarity economy absolutely was not ready to take advantage of that crisis, the global meltdown, right? It's a crisis. It created openings. We weren't ready. This time around, we're still not ready, but we're better organized. It's sort of offering a different narrative of the possibilities, and giving very specific examples of what's possible, and then trying to make the connections of all the things that just have emerged, right? COVID has forced lots of things to emerge, ranging from mutual aid to, right, all of a sudden, where the state, where the state has said, no, we're broke, balanced budgets are really important, we can't fund this, that, or the other. Well, there was the wherewithal because of COVID, right, to pass these, $1 trillion supports for business as well as individuals, right? So it just shows like the possibilities. So lots of interesting things have emerged with COVID. The same thing with climate change and disasters, right? That a lot of the ways that communities have been responding are some of the strongest responses have been through the solidarity economy, whether people call it that or not. But it's been on the ground cooperation and caring for each other and mutual aid, not necessarily the government agencies.
So who should get in touch with you and your network? Anybody in the US who's working in solidarity economy, yes?
Yeah. Well, let me just mention your neck of the woods, right? So the USN is part of RIPES. So RIPES is RIPESS. So it makes sense in French and Spanish. The English translation is the Intercontinental Network for the Promotion of the Social Solidarity Economy. I know it's really long, but RIPES is the global network that connects the continental networks, the national networks, both solidarity economy networks as well as sectoral networks that are part of solidarity economy. So that's a really important organization for people to know about.
So wherever you are, if you're in the solidarity economy, you should get involved with.
We don't have any
networks. Yes?
We don't have any network in Antarctica, but in all the other yes, in all the other continents there is a presence. So yeah, we're working on those penguins. Yeah.
Well, it would be interesting to do a solidarity scientists cooperative in Antarctica.
We did have this event, and we did get an email from some scientists in Antarctica saying that they were having their own little solidarity economy, like decentralized event or celebration or something like that. It was fun.
It does exist. It's just not formalized. Like a lot of these things, it really starts with community, doesn't it? It just starts with people talking to each other.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so if people are interested to get involved, where do they find you or to join the network?
Yeah, they can absolutely get in touch with, they can absolutely get in touch with me and I would forward it on to whoever's appropriate if I can't answer a question. Well, so you can share because I would give like the info at USN, but I don't know that gets checked.
That's not the best response.
So I would say,
better to respond directly to you.
Yeah. And or check out the website, which is
website.
just
Where is the website?
USSEN. So USSEN, all one word, USSEN.org.
Okay.
You would find it. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you. Fun to talk.
Yeah, lovely to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Take care.
Yes.
Enjoy. Stay safe.
Yes. And stay connected.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye now.
All right.